South Africa. A country of beautiful landscapes, abundant natural resources, exotic wildlife, and rich in culture. But for 46 years, this land was governed by the injustices of apartheid, a form of racial segregation enforced by the government. Racial segregation existed in South Africa since its colonization, but the general election of 1948 marked the beginning of official legislation that segregated the country by race. New legislation passed by the government classified all South African citizens as black, white, colored, or Indian, and required them to carry passbooks to identify their race to officials. This legislation went so far as to segregate residential areas by race, even forcibly removing non-white citizens from their homes. But some people were not willing to let their country be ruled by injustice. South Africans came together to fight against apartheid and rid their country of such oppression. One of these people was Mary Burton.
Mary Burton was born in Argentina in 1940 and moved to South Africa after marrying a native South African.
When I came to live in South Africa in 1961, at first I really struggled to find a way of coping with living in such an unjust society. And then I found the Black Sash, or it found me or something, and that was really the beginning of my political education.
The Black Sash is an organization that was founded in 1955 as a way for white women of South Africa to resist the injustice of apartheid. Through nonviolent demonstrations and campaigning, members of the Black Sash worked to eliminate all apartheid legislation and provide legal advice for the oppressed. The name of the organization comes from their custom of wearing black sashes as a sign of mourning for human rights. In a society that tried to oppress diversity, the Black Sash gained its strength from the various skills each member contributed.
I think that one of the reasons that the Black Sash survived, in fact, when many other organizations fell by the wayside under apartheid because it was so hard to keep on, was because there was a place for everybody in it. So, you know, some great brains who wrote wonderful legal papers and could understand the law very well and work within it very well. But there were also the people who made the soup and did the flower decorations and painted the posters and, you know, were part of the activities.
Mary served as president of the Black Sash from 1986 until 1990. During her time as president, the organization was a part of a major development in the deconstruction of apartheid, the release of Nelson Mandela from prison.
And on the 2nd of February 1990, hundreds and hundreds of us gathered in a central square in Cape Town, and that square was absolutely full of hundreds of people, and we were preparing yet another protest march through the streets of the city on the day of the opening of Parliament, against a Parliament that only represented a tiny proportion of all the citizens of this country. And many of us were a little anxious because previous marches in the preceding months had been broken up with water cannon and tear gas and baton charges, and we really didn't know what would happen that day. And as we stood there sort of preparing the march and waiting for dignitaries to come and lead the march and so on, suddenly there was huge excitement at one corner of the square. It's just up the road from Newspaper House, where our main daily newspapers are printed. And they had got the story that President de Klerk was going to announce the unbanning of the ANC and all the other political parties that were banned and enter into a process of negotiations and move towards freeing Mandela. And you could see that news travel across the square like a grass fire, because people started to jump up and down and pass on the news and cry and scream and shout and hug each other and so on. And what was, you know, going to be maybe a frightening kind of day turned into a dance of joy through the streets of Cape Town. And we were so excited and so thrilled, and 9 days later President Mandela, not then President, Nelson Mandela walked out of jail, and somehow we thought that everything was going to be absolutely marvelous immediately. Little did we know what a long road lay ahead.
After 4 more years of fighting and activism, Nelson Mandela was finally elected President of South Africa in the country's first open election in 1994.
And it wasn't until over a year later, in mid-1995, that the legislation was put before Parliament to establish a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And part of its task would be to grant amnesty. And when it came to the establishment of the Truth Commission, we had been very opposed to the concept of amnesty, but we had come around to understanding why it was necessary. And we nominated people to serve on the Truth Commission, and I was one of the people who was appointed. On the one hand, we were to discover people who had suffered gross violations of human rights, is what the law said, and get them to tell the truth and help them to find out the truth about what had happened to them. On the other hand, the Amnesty Committee was bound to grant amnesty to anybody who came forward to say what he or she had done in terms of a gross violation of human rights.
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission lasted from 1995 until 1997. In that time, over 7,000 people petitioned for amnesty. Cases were heard from those who committed human rights violations, as well as those who were the victims of these violations. Of the 7,000 plus petitions, less than 900 people were granted amnesty.
In principle, I think it's a good thing that commissions should be short-lived, because they are so traumatic for the whole society. And in a sense, I think you have to do it as well and as quick as you can, and get through to the rebuilding part of the work.
Although the Truth and Reconciliation Commission heard numerous cases, many violations remained unspoken. In an attempt to allow more people to express remorse for their actions and encouragement for the rebuilding of South Africa, Mary suggested a register of reconciliation. Mary described her idea as a response to a deep wish for reconciliation in the hearts of many South Africans, people who did not perhaps commit gross violations of human rights, but nevertheless wished to indicate their regret for failures in the past to do all they could have done to prevent such violations. The register can be found online and consists of 22 pages of entries of people apologizing for their inaction and supporting the progress South Africa is making. One such entry reads,
"I am ashamed of the behavior of my fellow white South Africans and regret my inactivity in not objecting to the human rights abuses of my fellow South Africans. I am eternally grateful to the magnanimous attitude of the African National Congress leadership with regard to their compassion and belief in democratic principles. I am once again proud to be a South African." Nearly 20 years after the abolition of apartheid, there is yet much work to be done. But thanks to leaders like Mary Burton, progress has been made and continues to be made.